The rook hovered, then slid, two old fingers planting it on a square no one sane would choose. The old man placed it like it was the most natural move in the world.
You just threw the game, old timer. You handed me the checkmate.
Leo's laugh tore through the park, and his partner clapped like victory was already his. In the background, a man in a pressed suit dropped his newspaper and got to his feet. His eyes stayed on the board, sharp and still. The laughter meant nothing to him. The old man's face was stone. Only the corner of his mouth betrayed him, a sliver of a smile. The hustler's glee faded as they noticed the stranger walking closer. The stranger's jaw tightened. He'd seen that sequence before, in a textbook from 30 years ago. He stepped to the table's edge, and the whole park seemed to lean in, holding its breath. 2 hours earlier, George Whitfield had stood in his cramped apartment, holding a piece of the past. His thumb brushed the worn headline. He knew every word by heart. Whitfield disqualified. The grainy photo showed a young man with a champion's stance.
They took everything, and I let them.
He pocketed the bitterness and walked to the park, the autumn sun doing little to warm his spine.
See that old guy in the cap? Perfect mark. I bet he folds by move 5.
Always alone, never talks. Let's do it.
Morning, sir. Care for a friendly game? Just a small wager to keep it interesting.
A small bet? I haven't done that in years, but why not? $5?
Leo set the board, his grin never fading. This was going to be the easiest payday of the week. Leo kicked off with an aggressive pawn thrust, the board clattering under his knuckle, daring the old man to flinch.
Let's see if you remember how the pieces move, old timer.
George answered with a knight, soft and precise, the piece barely grazing the board as if asking permission.
That's your opening. I've seen kids play with more fire.
We'll see.
Yeah. Don't embarrass yourself, Gramps.
But George's hand didn't tremble. Each piece settled with the weight of a memory that had burned for 30 years.
He doesn't even see the pattern forming, the noose tightening with every passive move.
Boring. When are you going to actually attack something?
The old man's eyes tracked the board with a predator's patience, and Leo, grinning at Mike, pushed another pawn like a man already counting his winnings. A small crowd had thickened around the table, drawn by the noise. A kid in a hoodie pushed to the front.
Marco, you want to watch me clean out the old timer? This is how it's done.
George answered by setting his bishop on a square so passive, it looked like a clerical error.
You are gifting me the center. What's your plan, huh? Just give up.
Exactly that. The louder they celebrate, the quieter the trap.
Come on, old man. At least try. You are putting us to sleep here.
Leo snatched a 10 from his pocket and slapped it onto the table, covering George's 5.
Double or nothing. Gramps, let's see if you've got the stomach for real stakes.
If that's what you want.
The board now seemed to lean in George's favor for anyone who knew the old disciplines, but Leo only saw a broken old man. Across the path, Arthur Voss walked with a newspaper under his arm, a man whose eyes had read 1,000 boards. He sat on a bench, intending to read, but the noise from the chess table flicked his attention sideways.
Look at that! You are hanging pieces like laundry, old man. This is embarrassing.
George moved his queen to a back rank square, seemingly retreating, and Leo attacked with a pawn storm. Arthur set his paper down. That retreat, it was a decade-old maneuver from a monograph he hadn't seen since Vienna.
He's never studied the deep games. He just sees a shuffle.
I've got you in 3 moves. Max, just resign and save your bus fare.
Arthur's gaze locked onto the corner of the board. The old man's structure was a coiled spring. He leaned forward, breath caught. Only a master would dare this, sacrifice material now to expose the king in 10 moves. And so, unnoticed by the laughing boys, the Grandmaster began to watch a ghost play chess. George lifted the rook and set it down on a square that seemed to scream, "Take me."
You just handed me the game, old fool. That piece is a free snack.
He's completely lost it. Easiest money of my life.
A murmur spread through the onlookers. Even the kid Marco leaned in, suspicion replacing amusement. Arthur's newspaper slid from his lap. He rose as if pulled by a wire. His eyes traced the rook's path. He'd seen this trap only once before in a monograph by the lost champion Whitfield.
I'll take your money and your pride, Gramps. Check in one move.
Arthur pushed through bystanders, his polished shoes clicking until he reached the table's edge. A hush fell over the table as the stranger stopped at its edge, eyes fixed on the board. The park held its breath. The Grandmaster opened his mouth, and the old man looked up with the faintest smile. Arthur's mouth opened, then closed. He'd seen the rook sacrifice, but the counter was still a breath away.
Thanks for the free boat, old man. My rook now.
George moved his knight, and the board rearranged. Leo's queen was suddenly cornered, her protection illusion.
Wait, what? That's not. You can't. My queen.
You assumed it was a blunder. That assumption cost you your strongest piece.
Arthur let out a slow breath. The trap was perfect, a quiet masterpiece from a forgotten textbook.
He set you up. The whole thing was a trap from move 6.
Shut up, Marco. I still have pieces. I can still win.
But the board told the truth. White's king was naked, his army scattered, and the old man's pieces were closing in.
Not yet. Let him finish. Then the world will know.
George moved his bishop to c5, and the final cage shut around the White king. Leo's face went pale.
Number, that's not possible. I can't move without losing my king. You tricked me.
Checkmate.
Leo's hand trembled. He tipped his king over, the wood clattering like a surrender bell. The small crowd burst into applause. Marco let out a whoop. Even Mike stared at the board, mouth open.
The Whitfield Gambit. A trap within a trap. I haven't seen that in 20 years.
The park seemed to hold its breath. The Gambit's name sailed through the chill like a ghost.
Whitfield. That's the guy who disappeared decades ago, right? The chess mystery.
Arthur's gaze never left George. The old man's face betrayed nothing, but his knuckles whitened on the table.
Where did you learn that? That gambit was never published. I am not asking about the gambit. I am asking who you are.
An old man who likes the game. That's all I am.
That gambit is Whitfield's. Only he and a handful ever mastered it. You are no amateur.
The silence pressed down. Every face turned toward the old man, waiting for a crack.
He won't stop. But I've buried that name for decades. I won't unearth it here.
Arthur's jaw tightened. The old man's denial was a fortress, but he knew the walls were thin.
I learned from old books. The world is full of forgotten things. Let it go.
I've spent 40 years in libraries. No book contains that gambit. You are protecting something.
The two men faced each other, and for a moment, the park was a silent chessboard of its own.
He's the ghost. I know it, but I'll give him one more moment before I speak. You are George Whitfield, the man who disappeared after the scandal. I'd know your play anywhere.
The crowd inhaled as one. Marco's face went blank. Leo's smirk died mid-breath.
You are the cheater. The guy who fixed matches and got banned for life.
Here, I found it. Whitfield disqualified. Championship stripped. Man, you are infamous.
They only know the verdict. Not the backroom deal. Not the threat. Not the man who framed me.
Arthur leaned closer, his expression unreadable. The old man's knuckles were bone white around the table edge.
Maybe there's more. Nobody just disappears for nothing. The story's gotta be bigger.
Bigger? He's a cheat. That's all that matters. You are a disgrace, old man.
George released the table and looked up, his eyes empty of fight, but full of something heavier. For a long moment, no one moved. The Grandmaster waited, hoping the truth would rise before the cameras found their way. Arthur gestured toward a quiet clearing behind the oak.
Walk with me a moment. I am not your enemy, and you know it. I read the old transcripts. The Federation had evidence you were framed, but they buried it to avoid scandal.
George stopped, his back still to the crowd, voice rusty.
That case was closed before you made Grandmaster. I don't need pity or a retrial.
This isn't pity. It's justice. I can call the board, force them to open the archive. Your name could be clean by spring.
A clean name won't give me back 3 decades. I am not your project.
Arthur's jaw worked. He'd expected resistance, but not this iron wall. Nearby, a reporter lowered his phone and took a step closer, pen already moving.
If he won't speak, then I'll have to speak for him. But I'll need a louder stage.
A man with a press badge pushed forward, phone raised, shouting questions about the old scandal, his lens aimed like a weapon.
Go on, answer him. The whole world's watching now, fake. Tell them how you rigged the board.
Faces closed in, and the evening sun turned the crowd into a wall of dark silhouettes.
You scammed my wallet today. Same as you scammed those tournaments. Admit it, cheater.
George's heel met the table leg. There was nowhere left to go, only the crowd's glare.
Let them shout. Silence is the only defense I have left.
A thin arm pushed through the mob, and Marco planted himself between George and the camera.
Leave him alone. He's not your headline. He's just a man who plays chess. Back off.
The reporter hesitated, his phone dipping an inch. Leo's sneer broke into a snarl. For a long second, the park held still. The kid, the cheat, and the storm of a dozen cameras.
He taught me more in one game than Leo ever did. Maybe you should learn from him instead of filming.
George's gaze shifted to the boy, and something long frozen behind his eyes cracked open.
You didn't have to stand there, son.
Yes, I did. You are not what they say. I saw the truth on the board.
Arthur stepped into the gap, his voice calm but carrying, flipping the reporter's angle like a chess tactic.
If you want a real story, film what happens when a legend teaches the next generation, not this circus.
The reporter hesitated, his phone dipping an inch. The mob's hunger flickered into curiosity. George's face remained still, but his eyes asked Arthur the only question left: what now? The crowd began to thin, cameras lowering one by one as the storm of the last hour dissolved into scattered murmurs.
Think about it. No cameras, just the board and the kids. They'd learn more than any expose could ever teach. I can call the Federation board tomorrow. They owe you. The kids in this park could learn from a legend.
The image flickered. A table of kids bent over pieces, caught in the same spell that once held him.
Decades of silence. And now this boy wants me to speak with the pieces again.
It doesn't have to be on camera. Just us. Show us the moves the hustlers never bothered to learn.
Arthur stepped back, letting the boy's words land. The old man's hand drifted toward a pawn, almost involuntarily.
I am not sure I am the teacher you want.
You are exactly the teacher they need. They've had enough hustle. They need truth.
George's fingers closed around the wooden pawn, and the shape felt like a handshake from his youth.
If I say yes, the world might come back. But if I say no, what do I have left?
He opened his mouth, and the park seemed to lean in for an answer.
No cameras, no press, just the game. I'll teach anyone who wants to learn.
The park exhaled. Marco's eyes went wide, and Arthur was already reaching for his phone.
That's all I need. Give me 2 minutes.
Arthur dialed, speaking low and fast, his voice carrying the weight of a Grandmaster making a move.
You'll teach us? The real stuff. Like the gambit?
George extended his hand, and Marco shook it. Not a bet, but a promise.
Waste of time, old man. These kids will be just as broke as you.
Mike lingered a moment longer than Leo, then turned away, his silence louder than any insult. Kids closed in, pulling at George's sleeves, already pointing at the board like it held buried treasure.
The board approved a small grant. It's yours. Just teach.
George reset the board with slow, deliberate hands, the pieces clicking home like a lock.
The rook you all saw as a blunder was a baited hook. Watch the knight's path after the sacrifice.
He moved the pieces, and 6 kids leaned in as if the board were a campfire.
So the whole thing was a trap from the start? How do you plan that far ahead?
You think backward. Picture the end before the first move. Every sacrifice is an investment.
Arthur leaned against an oak, arms crossed, a quiet smile forming beneath the autumn canopy. Nearby, the reporter lowered his phone and wrote in longhand, the aggression gone from his pen.
Patience is a weapon, sharper than any opening. Learn that, and they'll never see you coming.
The kids began resetting pieces on their own boards, fumbling through the gambit's first positions.
This is more than I've let myself feel in 30 years. Quiet, but alive.
Weeks passed. The chess corner bloomed from 1 table to 6, the grant-buying boards, clocks, and a canvas canopy.
You are learning fast. Tomorrow we dissect the Latvian gambit.
The kids came daily, not for bets, but to see what George saw in the pieces. Even the hustlers came back, not to play, but to stand under the oak, arms crossed, saying nothing.
Look at Mike. He's watching but won't walk over.
He'll come when he's ready. The game doesn't keep count of pride.
George's mornings now belonged to the kids. The old clippings stayed in the drawer, untouched for 2 months.
The city wants to know who runs this. I told them a friend of mine.
That's more than I need.
The park had changed. Where shouting once echoed, now only the click of clocks and the quiet hum of lessons. On the first Saturday of November, the park held its first youth tournament. 6 tables arranged beneath a gold canopy of oak leaves.
This is the position he showed me. If I sacrifice the exchange now, his king is naked.
Marco's hand trembled above a rook, his opponent smirking, unaware the bait had already been swallowed. He slid the rook to a square of no return, and the board shifted like a gate opening. George leaned forward on the sideline, his breath caught. The kid had listened.
He found it. The whole sequence, just as we practiced.
3 moves later, Marco whispered checkmate. The opponent stared, then tipped his king.
That was a Whitfield tactic, if I ever saw one. You've taught him well.
I only showed him the door. He walked through on his own.
The applause rose, but George only saw Marco's face and recognized the same fire that had once burned in a younger man's chest. 3 days after the tournament, George sat on his usual bench, a newspaper folded across his knee. The headline spanned the top in bold serif, Whitfield Park Chess Program, Empowering Youth. Below it, a photo of kids bent over boards. The article buried the scandal in the 3rd paragraph, then spent a full column on Marco's checkmate. Arthur Voss was quoted near the end. George Whitfield is giving back what was taken from him, not fame, but knowledge.
They finally let the past be background noise. The kids are the headline.
Arthur appeared, his suit as crisp as ever, and extended his hand.
You see? The truth has a way of surfacing when you stop chasing it.
I didn't need the world to know. I needed the kids to learn.
George folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket, not as a trophy, but as a bookmark for the page he'd just turned. Arthur's grip was firm, the handshake of 2 men who understood that some victories are quiet. By spring, the chess corner had doubled. Adults brought coffee and sat on the benches, watching the kids who now taught each other.
George, we've got 3 new kids today. One of them already knows the fork tactic.
Leo stood at the edge, hands in pockets, but his eyes tracked the boards with a new kind of hunger.
How do you spot a sacrifice so early? I watched you beat me, and I still don't get it.
You start by accepting that every piece has a price, even the ones you think you can't lose.
Arthur came by every few days, setting his clock beside the board and nodding at the new faces.
You've built a classroom, George. Not a single one of them is looking at their phones.
The board demands attention. It's the only honest thing left.
The park had become a sanctuary of clocks and quiet voices where no one mistook a fallen piece for defeat.
This is enough. This is more than I ever asked for.
Evening came. George sat at the table where a rook had sealed his fate. From his breast pocket, he drew a photograph. 12 kids crowded around a board, Marco's grin splitting his face.
No shame here. Only names I'll never forget.
He set the photo beside the board and breathed the autumn air, shoulders soft, the weight of 30 years finally released. The old clipping was still in his drawer at home, untouched since the first snow. It belonged to a different man. He picked up a pawn, the same wooden shape that had once felt like a confession, and set it on the table with a click. His smile was quiet, not triumphant, just a man at peace with the board and the fading light. Somewhere across the park, a child laughed, and the sound echoed like a note from a game that had only just begun.
The game goes on.
And as the park wrapped him in silence, That single truth was enough. Footsteps, unhurried. The Grandmaster walked through the empty tables. He stopped beside George's table and lifted a white king from the board. He set it down again, centered and upright, a king crowned not by a title, but by a season. George's eyes traced the piece, then rose to meet Arthur's. No word passed, a single nod, slow and complete. Arthur straightened and turned, his silhouette dissolving into the amber light. Across the park, boards clicked. Children leaned over pieces, their voices a quiet river. The park breathed, and the game went on beneath the autumn trees. The White King stood at center board, catching the last light of the day, and somewhere, a boy named Marco set his own king down and knew exactly where to place it.